this is Tiffany. Sorry, kind of playing with this here. The Lady Autist, and this is another episode of Stupid Light, and there's a cat behind me. Another episode of Spilling Tea. Alright, folks, this has to do with the JDAH case, but it's also something I want to cover because it keeps getting hammered on in the news. It also has a lot to do with the petition I put out there. I want to bring up drug addiction and mental illness and disabilities. The reason why I want to bring up these three things in particular is that so many people, including the news media, keep hammering on Depp that maybe he could have done these things or that he's no angel because of drug addiction. Well, here's a few things you should know about that. The media, Hollywood, and the world in general have been stereotyping addiction since, well, practically forever. They have turned people who suffer from addiction into these two-dimensional characters. These no-good lowlives, burden on their families, steal from their mother's purse in order to get high, are willing to go to any sexual deviancy just to get to the next fix. I'm sure you all watch television, you know what I'm talking about. They also talk about how drugs make people violent. Very similar to the same crap they say about autistics, really, just by the fact that we exist. Let's dig into this a little bit. So, with such preconceived notions already in play, and we're talking way before the JDAH thing was even a thing, then as soon as the drug addiction was brought up by AH, it's what Greg calls that silver bullet, right? A way to decimate somebody's character. They understand, unfortunately, how the game is played very well. They know how drug addicts are perceived by the world. So that is why they continue to harp on it. Now, there's a lot of things that feed into addiction. Two of the main things are, and you'll see it prevalently, mental illness and people with disabilities, and even people who have both. Now, I want to start with the problem of, first of all, dehumanizing the person who is suffering from the addiction by categorizing them as these two-dimensional characters. Kind of like with disability, even if there is somewhat of a positive light that is spent on it, it's still about the people who saved the drug addict and not on the hard work they put into recovery themselves. But that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is, addiction covers a lot more things than what the media and Hollywood has portrayed over the years. These folks are not two-dimensional characters. They are human beings that fell into an illness. And the fact that we are still punishing people for that and demonizing them for that instead of looking at them with compassion and understanding, says a whole lot about our society. They say that you can judge a society on how they treat the least of these, how they treat their troubled people. And if that's the case in America and the world, we're all still in deep doo-doo. Now, not all drug addiction is related to mental illness or disability. But here's the thing. A lot of people who have mental illness or they have a developmental disability will self-medicate when overwhelmed, especially if it's undiagnosed. I myself am a recovering alcoholic. When my dad died in 2008, I essentially crawled into a bottle of Sailor Jerry's rum and did not come out of it for over a decade. Now, during that same time, when I was suffering from that addiction and drinking very heavily, I was also my state's advocacy specialist. It was part of the time of when I was part of the Governor's Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorders. It was during the time where I was really getting things kicked off for my advocacy and activism in the disability rights and neurodiversity rights movement. It was during that time I was assisting in taking down the Judge Rotenberg Center. So, in that story, you see two things. One, I was self-medicating in regards to the grief I felt and loss of my dad. People with autism know we have circular thinking, and when we get stuck in a certain circle of grief, if we do not give ourselves the chance to grieve properly, we will self-medicate. If we are overwhelmed by sensory, we're at a concert or something, we may self-medicate by drinking or other drugs that will make the sensory issues more easy to handle. And that's just across the board with us, especially those who are neurodivergent. JD is neurodivergent. He has ADHD. And think about that. When he was getting overwhelmed with her, overwhelmed by his own emotions, the sensory, the horror of what was going on, he fell back on old habits. The same habits he would use to self-soothe and self-medicate when he was younger. And that is something we will do. I've been an on and off alcoholic. I've only really managed to, seemingly so far, God willing, kicked the booze for good within this last couple of years. There were times where I would get overwhelmed by emotion, by stress, and I would go back to the bottle because it was a comfort crutch. It was destroying me. It probably could have killed me if I would have continued on. But it's something that happens. But I was still doing all of this advocacy during the time. So I did not fit that violent, criminal, deadbeat stereotype that they are constantly pushing. Neither does JD. Because during that time when he was in relationship with her and all that horrible stuff was happening, he was still going to children's hospitals. He was still showing up on set and doing his jobs. he was still keeping in contact with his friends. He also does not fit that profile, no matter how many times they hammer at him and try to make him fit that profile. People with mental illness. I have PTSD, being both a child victim and later on a DV victim. Now, with the child victim, I do want to make clear it was not my parents. It very much was my school boys. It was vicious. It was my step-sibling. I won't go into the details of that. I just wanted to clear that up just in case anyone asked. So when you're facing that, you do, it's not tend to self-medicate. Especially when you feel absolutely alone. You're looking for an escape. You're looking for something that could, if you can't escape physically, you at least want to escape emotionally. So, and that's something people with mental illness, people with neurodivergent disabilities do. But many of us are still functioning members of society. We care about our families. We do what we can to help others, all while suffering from these addictions. But society and these women looking for the silver bullet do not care who they hurt. When people like AH go after his drug addiction, go after his mental health, go after disability, she's not just trying to destroy him. She's throwing a whole lot of people under the bus and reinforcing those painful, horrible stereotypes in regards to people who suffer from addiction. And if people want to say, well, it's not really harming them, bullshit. Bullshit. When you have people like Heard demonizing someone as well known as Depp, and then you have a UK judge that will go ahead and back it up, this, especially for the functioning addicts like me, makes us not want to reach out to someone and get help. It makes us want to continue to keep that secret, which is dangerous. People can die that way. People can die that way. I could have died that way. We gotta stop turning those who suffer from addiction into these two-dimensional either lowlives or monsters. This whole idea, well, he was on this, so it makes sense why he committed this crime, needs to stop. There is major correlation to addiction and neurological disabilities and mental illness, and it needs to be studied. It needs to be met with compassion, and conversations need to start happening. Because people's lives, their abilities to move on and be able to process things in a healthy way needs to start happening. We got to stop finger pointing at drugs as the cause for all ills in society. We have to stop throwing those who are suffering from a very real illness into jail cells like they're animals. We got to start looking for underlying causes and working with people with addictions so that they can improve and can get better and have that light at the end of the tunnel instead of having the whole of society look down on them like they're the scum of the earth. Alright, I just wanted to get that out there. I'm just really tired of how people who suffer from addiction have been treated, especially throughout the entirety of this court case. It deals with so many more people than just JD. Now, that is all I have for this evening. Now, folks, if you could, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the likes, and the comments. YouTube is notorious for removing my views. And I do hope you have a wonderful day. Have a good one.